Thank you.
Great, thanks, Young-Fei, and welcome everyone. Happy to be sharing some of the competition overview here. You should have access to the competition brief. You've probably seen it already. If not, it's available in a number of different places, including, I think, in the Eventbrite link where you registered for the competition. So I'm going to walk through some of the level details at a high level. Happy to answer your questions afterwards and fill in anything that maybe wasn't in the brief or wasn't clear. Next slide, please. So this year we're looking at teams of 3 students or recent graduates from U of T. We're hoping to, really encourage multidisciplinary teams. So we would want within your team of 3 students to have at least 2 different U of T departments represented. This is something that we've done as a requirement for the last 2 years, and it has seemed to work really well to make sure people are bringing together experiences from different perspectives. Of course, you're also going to want to identify a topic which is based on the theme of transportation equity, which we're going to talk a little bit more about the topic in a couple of minutes, but that's going to be the focus of your research. And with your team of 3 students over a span of 2 months, July and August, we'll be assigning you hopefully 2 mentors, professional mentors who are going to work with you on the project and provide their guidance. And over this 2-month period, you will work on your project to create some recommendations that have some kind of transformative impact or insight on current policy or practice in transportation planning in the region. Next slide. So it's a bit of a 2-phase process. As part of phase 1, everyone will, once you've formed your team, you submit your application. It's a 2-page application, so we're looking for what is the challenge or question, or, what is your research question that you're trying to answer? Talking a little bit about the approach. One thing I want to flag is there is a mandatory component where you should do at least a few interviews with professional stakeholders. We think that's a very important component of getting some more perspectives for the research you do, and that can then supplement, that can either be the primary part of your research or it can supplement some other type of method that you want to propose. And you can speak to your mentors about who might be appropriate contacts to interview if you don't have your own, but you may have your own contacts as well. Those you should at least sort of mention, a proposal of who you might want to reach out to. You should also talk about your team composition. That's largely, the departments people represent, whether you're recent graduates, current students, etc., that kind of thing. Provide a 1-page CV for each of your team members, basically your resume of some past experiences just to show that. And then also within the competition brief, there's a signed waiver. Basically, this waiver is just saying that everyone who participates in the competition, at the end of it, you're okay with the the results and your research papers being shared, which will happen, at least for the successful teams, but for everyone, we intend to kind of share these materials, and we just want to make sure that everyone up front, when they apply, recognizes that this will be the case. Next slide. So submissions are due in about 2 weeks, June 15th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. We're looking for a single PDF document, so that would include your 2-page application, the CVs for each of the students, as well as the signed waiver as a single document that can be emailed to UTTAN. We know there's a lot of interest. Last year we had quite a few teams participating, and I think just to make it fair for everyone who's competing in the competition, only up to 5 successful teams will proceed to the next phase. So if there are many more than 5 teams, there'll be an evaluation process for the proposals that will take place. That committee will judge the applications based on 3 criteria. The first is the innovation of the question asked, or in other words, is the research question that you've defined interesting and impactful for the region? Is it something new, or at least some sort of new aspect of a question that's been asked before? The proposed approach, so what are the methods? How do you actually propose to do it? Is this a research project that could actually be achieved and that makes sense? And then the diversity of the team, which is largely based on the sort of diversity of the degrees and experiences that you're bringing to the team. So After those 5 teams have been selected, we move into phase 2, which it does involve a research paper and presentation. So following the 2-month period, which basically starts end of June, first week of July, we'll get into the dates in a second. All of those teams will be working together on the research topics, working with your mentor to undertake the research. In terms of mentors, the goal is to have everyone have 2 mentors. We try to find mentors and match them with the teams, sort of like with appropriate subject matter expertise based on what your research project is about. We try to find balance in different kinds of ways, including having someone from the public sector and private sector, just to provide a sort of diversity of opinions as well to the research that you're undertaking. We do think it's sort of important for the student teams to periodically check in with your mentors, and potentially even at the beginning, it would be advisable to sort of set up milestones for when you're going to get review and feedback. So the mentors are assigned to you, but it's still up to the students to make sure they're reaching out to the mentors to get that feedback. And otherwise, the relationship's kind of up to you. So you can structure it how it works for you. For sure. Okay, so one thing is we do recommend setting up a few milestone meetings, probably a meeting at the beginning, a bit of a kickoff to go over your research, your plan, and how you think you could work together. Secondly, you probably want to talk to them about potential industry contacts, any sort of resources they might be able to offer, or your research methods if they have experience with the type of things you're doing. And then finally, once you are, have undertaken your research and are putting together your final report, I think it is very useful, again, to talk to your mentor, get some information on the written submission, take their comments into account, because of course they'll have a lot of experience sort of writing reports and may have some good suggestions. And then finally, and perhaps the most important thing, after you put your presentation together, doing a run through with your mentor to get their feedback on the presentation style and what could be sort of included would be very important. So next slide. So finally, there's 2 sort of components that you're going to be asked to complete. The first is a final report about 5,000 words, which doesn't include any appendices or references that you might want to include, which, and more details about this are in the competition brief, but basically the report summarizes your activities, the research you did, your methods, findings, and recommendations. That is submitted for judging a few weeks in advance, which gives the judges enough time to really dig into these reports and read through them and provide more detailed comments. Then you'll also submit a presentation. This is for about 12 minutes, so relatively short but high impact, which will be presented on September 14th. And that's where the panel of judges will listen to the presentations. That will be a public event, most likely virtual, where the top 3 teams will be identified. Also just flagging here, the report is worth 60%, the presentation 40%. Next slide. So schedule, alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the 2-page proposals are due June 15th. About a week after that, June 22nd, the 5 successful teams will be announced. 1 week after that, on June 29th, we will be letting each of the teams know who their successful mentors are, or who their mentors are, rather, and you can start reaching out to them and setting up any meetings. And then it's kind of a bit unstructured. It's up to your team to figure out how you want to do the project. But by August 17th, near the end of the month, you'll submit your final reports. You'll have about a week to, I guess, 2 weeks to work through your presentation and sort of iron out the details on your PowerPoint decks. And then a couple weeks after that, there'll be the presentation and award event. So finally, the part that people may be interested in, prizes are $650 per student for the first ranked team, $475 per student for the second ranked team, and $375 per student for the third ranked team. All the sort of successful teams will also receive a digital participation certificate, as well as we do try to make an effort to highlight the competition, but also the research you're doing and the students participating through our social media channels, on the website, and through other sources like that, to try to raise the great research that all the students have been doing. Finally, I'm not going to go into the scoring piece too much, but it is in the competition brief. If you do want to look at the rubric, this is more for your written submissions and presentations. Everything does kind of break down what the judges are going to be scoring and sort of the percentage values for each of these different elements. So that's available in the rubric for you. Awesome. And I think now we're turning it over to Adam or Yasser to walk through the theme.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kevin, and welcome everyone. I'm Adam Rosenfield, a UTTAN member at large, U of T alum, and I'm a senior policy advisor with Ontario's Ministry of Transportation. And I'm really excited to present this year's theme, which is based around the topic of transportation equity as we emerge into what will be, post-pandemic cities. I think, last year when we focused on network resilience in the age of COVID-19 and beyond, we had some amazing ideas put forward. This year we want to focus on kind of looking ahead to our cities as they adapt to a changed world and recognizing ways in which the pandemic has highlighted existing inequalities across our society, and with traditional, or certainly transportation being no exception to that. So if we go to the next slide, I think it's useful to start with a definition of transportation equity so we can all kind of be on the same page. And this is one definition I quite like. It's accessible and affordable transportation for everyone in the community, resulting in fair distribution of transportation resources, benefits, costs, programs, and services based on differences in income, ability, and other factors affecting transportation choice and impact. So there's a lot to unpack there, and we won't go into too much detail, but I think it's worth highlighting kind of the breadth of what's covered there. Looking at transportation challenges through an equity lens means not only thinking about, technical aspects like, network performance or congestion, but it means thinking about, who wins and loses when decisions are made, when resources are allocated, when benefits accrue, or when negative impacts are imposed on a community. So I just want to go through a few slides to give some examples of applying an equity lens to transportation challenges. So I think first, let's talk a bit about our streets. All right, some of you may be familiar with what's called the Vision Zero movement, striving to eliminate traffic fatalities and injuries in our streets. And, a core aspect of the danger on our streets is not only the scale, but also the inequity of who is being victimized. And on the slide here are some stats, largely from the US, but some similar trends exist in Canada around, particularly around the disproportionate impact on both low income and also on racialized communities. For example, in Toronto, the incidence of fatalities and injuries is higher in areas with lower household income, higher percentage of immigrant populations, lower numbers of daily car trips, and yet a more car-dependent built form. So just as an example. And if we go to the next slide, if we shift to our discussion around transit systems, for those of you familiar with the region, you may know our system does not necessarily provide equitable access across the city with, wide disparity in the speed, frequency, and quality of transit services depending on where you are. So, this map, for example, is part of U of T research by Professor Steve Farber and Jeff Allen. It shows areas of highest and lowest transit accessibility. And if you look close, you can see little dots, each one of which represents 50 people living below the poverty line. And so we see clusters not only in the city, but also spread throughout suburban regions. And it kind of highlights the issue of the suburbanization of poverty. And the role that transportation must play in providing upward social mobility. So there's a lot to think about in that regard as well. Moving on to the next slide, on air quality. So, not all transportation issues are about mobility and accessibility. Some aspects are about the externalities that are imposed on our systems, by our systems on communities that may not have had any say on these impacts. And so this map here is U of T research by Professor Greg Evans and his team as part of a study that found traffic emissions pollute about 1 in 3 Canadian homes. And when you look at the heat map here, you can see concentrations around major highways and interchanges and in the downtown. And so, there's a question, what does that mean for people living nearby? And broadly, how might we address not only air pollution, but, the inequities of the spatial distribution of things like pollution? So, another aspect here to think about. Moving on to technology. On the left, we see a depiction of connected and autonomous vehicles. And while these technologies may have great promise as they are developed, there's a host of potential equity issues related to the rollout of these technologies. And so, both from the specific operational issues, so you can look up the trolley problem if you haven't heard of it. But really, more broad planning and policy considerations, like how our governments want to invest in and also regulate these technologies, and how they may fit in and or compete with other modes. Likewise, on the right, we see here an e-bike and an e-scooter, and these kind of modes may offer expanded mobility options to more people with a lower carbon footprint. But they're not without controversy, of course. And Toronto, for example, has recently declined to permit the use of e-scooters, relating in part to concerns around equity for people with disabilities. And there's a lot of competing viewpoints on that issue, just as another example. And so moving on, finally, to the planning aspect itself. And so I think it's important we focus not just on outcomes, not just on technologies and modes of transportation, but also on process and how we collectively make decisions as a society when it comes to things like transportation. Who's at the table and who has a voice. So, the image on the left, this is a parking garage at Dundas in Victoria, built in 1957. And what's special about it is it was one of two fully self-parking automated garages built in the 1950s in Toronto, and with hydraulic elevators and guideways, and this was seen as the future. And I mention this not only because the two garages that were built were a total bust. They constantly broke down, and they were ultimately demolished in under a decade after they were built. But also because aspects like this, aspects like parking, are baked into our planning process. With things like minimum parking requirements, in our zoning codes, stipulating how we seemingly have to build our city around one conception of what our transportation system should look like, with some parts of society benefiting, while others may not. And so, if that kind of garage is something, as an example, we decided to wanted to invest our money in and invest our downtown land in, it speaks to, the process of the planning system that got us there. And so, there's so many elements of transportation planning that impact equity outcomes, whether it's across income or age, gender, race, geography, and more. So these are just a few different areas that I think paint a kind of a wide picture about where equity plays a role across transportation topics. So moving forward to potential approaches here, I touched on a few different areas, but there's such a wide range of important and worthwhile areas of research that we would encourage you to think about as you're putting together your ideas. And we want to keep it broad, not to limit the ideas, but also maybe suggesting some potential approaches here. So, for one example can be, how do we reduce spatial inequalities in access to social and economic opportunity, right? Because at the end of the day, access is what we're all trying to achieve here: access to opportunity, socially, economically, whatnot. And so, another idea might be developing and overseeing what we're now emerging with new mobility technologies to ensure more evenly distributed benefits, but also evenly mitigated impacts, because we know that there can be impacts on the negative side as well. A different aspect may be talking about intersectional challenges. So solving broader societal transportation challenges, such as the sector's contribution to the climate crisis, but done in a way that also addresses distributional impacts, right? So how can we address climate change without imposing new burdens on equity when it comes to transportation policy? And then finally, we want to mention, this is not, it doesn't have to be one mode that you're focused on. It can be different modes. It can be, walking, biking, transit, driving, etc. It can be individual modes, shared modes. It doesn't have to be a mode specific project. It can be quite, open-ended how you want to conceptualize this. And we encourage you to really think about that as you're putting your proposals together. And so that was just a bit of an overview of this year's theme, and hopefully gives you a flavor of different ideas and challenges to address. There's no shortage of equity challenges in this area. So yeah, we really look forward to hearing what you come up with. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to Yunfei.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Adam. That was great. So in terms of our next steps, the first one is obviously finalize your team. You can use the idea generation Google Sheet, which Karina will put a link in the chat, and to find team members that have similar interests as you. And I'm going to go into more of this in the next part. And you can also send an email to us, utri@utoronto.ca, and we can try our best to match you with the team. And Kevin mentioned this earlier in the overview part. Once you finalize your team, you find your team, the next step will be submit your 2-page proposal to utri@utoronto.ca by June 15th, 2021. And that's by 11:59 p.m. and that is Eastern time, because I know a few of us are operating in BC. And then lastly, just to encourage you more, keep in mind of the prizes that we have: $650 per student for the first ranked team, $475 for the second team, and then $375 for the third ranked team. And can you go to the next slide? Yeah, connecting with each other. So finding a team could be challenging. So we have a few ways that can help you to connect with each other. So, I mean, the first one is obviously reaching out to people you know, or people you're just meeting in this chat, in this event today. And I mentioned there's a Google spreadsheet that's set up, and then you can put your own contact information in there with your skill set. And then you can also put the topics that you want to explore a little bit more, your interest in the spreadsheet as well. So you can try to find a match through that Google spreadsheet. And Adam give a really good presentation on the background, a lot of great food for thought, ideas that can be used for this year's theme. And obviously those ideas are suggestions. You can revise them and based on your interest. But there's some key questions that were, challenging our members, our participants to consider when you put your proposals and when you're developing your project. The first one is, who does this impact, right? So you can have this amazing policy papers, but so what, right? What kind of the stakeholders, what kind of impact your project will have? And in terms of implementation, what could be the 3 steps that can really address this issue for your project, for your topic? And feel free to reach out to any of us at any time if you need help. Next, please. So yeah, again, I want to emphasize this Google spreadsheet again. That will be a really good tool for you to match with people who share similar interests as you. And feel free to reach out to us at utri@utoronto.ca, and we're here to help you. We're here we can do our best to match you with the team and just to provide any support, any questions that you may have. And I think that is the end of our presentation. So Pat, I think you can stop the recording.